Pig butchering is a relatively novel online scam that has evolved from industrial scale hubs in Southeast Asia. I mean, the name pig butchering suggests it's a kind of fattening up of victims. It's a far more subtle, a far more kind of long game kind of scam in which intimate relationships are built with people, in which people are slowly enticed into investing in certain schemes. Often it's around cryptocurrency. It can also be online gambling, but crypto has become a major part of it.
Hello, and welcome to Public Key, the podcast from Chainalysis. This is your host, Ian Andrews. This week I've got a special episode for you. Over the nearly 2 years since we started this podcast, one of our most frequent topics has been the romance/investment scam known as pig butchering. This particular flavor of scam is pervasive. How many of you have gotten the random wrong number text messages that are often step one in recruiting a victim? And these scams are industrial scale. Experts believe billions of dollars are being stolen annually from around the globe. And the organized crime groups behind the scam are also responsible for kidnapping, human trafficking, and forced labor. When I speak to law enforcement and prosecutors about how we can protect people from falling victim to these scams, it always comes back to education. So this week, we're going to go back in the archive and pull the best content from past episodes on pig butchering. And we're going to boil it down to the key insights for your listening enjoyment. We'll be covering the basics of what pig butchering is, some of the challenges in combating the crime, and how collaboration and educational awareness are key solutions to preventing this complex crime from continuing. The full episodes we pull from today are, of course, available in the archive, and we've linked to them in the show notes. The Chainalysis team also just published new research linking via on-chain activity stolen funds paid into these scams to the ransoms paid by families of individuals forced to work for the organized crime groups behind the scams. To read more of that amazing blog, you can find the link in the show notes. And of course, if you want to learn more about these subjects in person, come out next month to the Chainalysis Links Conference, which is just around the corner in New York City on April 9th and 10th. The event has riveting keynotes and panel discussions, along with a range of training workshops, and is sold out 2 years in a row. So if you're considering attending, I recommend buying your ticket immediately. So we're going to start off with our first episode on pig butchering that we ever did. The guest was Alastair, who was the APAC editor for Vice World News at the time. He really gives us a holistic view of what pig butchering actually is. We recorded this episode in August of 2022, and I have to admit that at the time, this term and crime was very new to me and probably many others. Let's hear from Alastair about what pig butchering is. I only recently learned this term a couple weeks back. Someone on my team brought up pig butchering. And I have to admit, the first time I heard it, I immediately went to the process that starts the effort that ends up with bacon on my plate. And obviously I was very, very wrong about what my colleague was talking about. I've since jumped into the subject and read quite a lot of your reporting. Maybe we could start there. What is this pig butchering topic, and dive in from there?
So pig butchering is a relatively novel online scam that has evolved from industrial scale hubs in Southeast Asia. Cambodia has become a major hub of it, Myanmar and Laos too. I guess what differentiates it is, the name pig butchering suggests it's a kind of fattening up of victims. It's a far more subtle, a far more kind of long game kind of scam in which intimate relationships are built with people. Scripts are used, sophisticated scripts are used in which people are kind of slowly enticed into investing in certain schemes. Often it's around cryptocurrency. It can also be online gambling, but crypto has become a major part of it. I think what distinguishes it is just the kind of scale of it. The human trafficking involved, the large teams behind these scammers. They're essentially kind of criminal enterprises, major scams with different layers of workers. People assigned different roles in the scam.
Just give us a sense of what we're talking about here. This is not a few dollars lost accidentally on the internet, is it?
These are centers in Southeast Asia. In a town called Sihanoukville in Cambodia, there are converted casino sites, converted condos, capable of housing thousands and thousands of workers. The exact scale of it is not known. Obviously, with a kind of underground industry like this, it's not going to be easy to put firm figures on it, but it's easily into the thousands, potentially tens of thousands. And the best estimates we have are these workers are stealing, on average, a few $100s a day each, which is very accomplishable. That's a small, easily done figure. And when you convert that into 10,000 people, say, That's a figure nearing $1 billion over the course of a year. 10,000 people is a very conservative estimate for the number of scammers there are in Cambodia alone. There's probably, estimates would suggest there's probably a similar number of people doing the same thing in Laos, similar number of people doing the same thing in Myanmar. I'd say conservative estimates would put the money being stolen here into the billions, several billions.
Now, before Alastair continues on, another guest, Nicholas Staub, who is the co-founder of Cybera, they're creating a platform for victims and industry stakeholders to share information around crypto-related scams, talks about the magnitude of the problem from his perspective, and then Alastair continues on to distinguish pig butchering from other financial crime.
Again, one of these numbers that is quite tough to measure. The FBI says something like, I think, 10 billion. There's a big underreporting. Gaza, one of the non-profits, have estimated that it's already in the trillions. Wow. So there is several measurements, but clearly the number one crime out there when you talk about victim losses. And one thing I always like to point out, right, almost everybody has somebody in their family or a friend who has been scammed. And sometimes it's smaller amounts. But if you add all of that up, right, we're talking billions. And that is money that goes from individuals, from legitimate people, really more or less directly to full organized crime. So it's money, but it's also organized crime that's growing, And of course, there's a lot of emotional consequences for victims themselves beyond losing money, which can go as far as to leading to suicide and really, really bad results. So yeah, for us, that's, pure motivation to do more and to fight back.
What is kind of distinguishing feature of pig butchering is the flexibility of it. It's not, they don't have a kind of one track route in which they scam people. They'll just read you. They'll read what your trigger points are, your pressure points, and they'll adjust and adapt based on that. It's not strictly romance. It's not strictly investment. It's not strictly one thing or the other. They just sense what your trigger points are. They read you. With Cindy, the lawyer who lost $2.7 million, who I featured in my article, she was going through cancer treatment, and they tapped in on that. They became like a source of comfort, like a stable presence where they would know when her appointments were. They would message her saying, "How did your appointment go?" That's not even romance. That's just, I'm tapping into this huge vulnerability you're experiencing right now, and I'm going to pretend I care. A big feature of it is messaging good night, good morning. It seems like a small thing, but it's a subtle relationship building. And it really isn't just as obvious as we're going to start a relationship here with a fake woman. It could be a female-on-female relationship was something I heard about quite a lot, like a sisterly relationship, a brotherly relationship, an investment relationship. One of the people who got scammed was, they met them on LinkedIn, and their LinkedIn profile, the scammer's LinkedIn profile listed them as going to the same university and then working at the same company as the person who was scammed. And that forged a connection there. They bonded over their mutual work experience and their mutual educational experience. A lot of it wasn't romantic, or not strictly romantic.
How did they actually start making money off the scheme? Like, was there a single tactic, or were there multiple paths that they were using to extract funds from their victims?
I'd say it would take a few weeks for anything to be raised at all. That's what's good about it. It's not the email saying, "We need your funds, transfer this, that." But about 3 weeks in was the average I heard, 3 weeks to a month in, where they'd subtly raise investment opportunities.
Now, before Alastair goes into other angles to this complex scam, he does mention investment opportunities as part of the scam. Nicholas Staub discusses the evolution of these investment scams from wire transfers to crypto.
The other one that you've mentioned it several times is investment scams, which now mostly goes by the name of pig butchering, which is most of the time crypto. And so from what I personally have seen, when I started in law enforcement around 8 years ago, there was a lot already of romance scams with wire transfers. And I did see that there has been a trend to mix that and start with a romance scam, right? And then get the people, the victim basically, to invest. And most of the time it's to invest in a fake crypto platform. And that's pretty much what you call pig butchering today. We see it at least, yes, there's crypto, but we also have several victims where the scammers, first they make a bank transfer, then they switch to crypto. So we really see both, right?
With that explanation from Nicola, it's probably now clear that these scams haven't just started with crypto, but have actually been around for some time. There has been the evolution from wire transfers and traditional fiat currency to now crypto transfers. Now that we have that groundwork, though, Alastair's going to explain the romantic relationship angle that many scammers take to capture their victims' attention.
One person I spoke to said that they developed this romantic relationship with a woman they thought was in Singapore. And then one night they were having a conversation. She said, sorry, give me 30 minutes. I need to go and do something. She came back and inevitably he asked, oh, what were you up to? And she said, oh, sorry, my uncle just came over to talk to me about crypto investment. We both started that recently. And then she's like, oh, have you ever heard about it? It's extremely subtle. It wasn't, you should invest in crypto. It's, I'm investing in crypto. Are you interested in hearing about my experiences, what I'm doing? Another subtle aspect of it is it's never transfer me money. It's, I'm investing through this website. I'm getting some good returns. Do you want me to send you the link? Just like a friend would, just like a romantic interest would. It's never, you need to send me money. That's avoided at all costs by the sounds of it. The notion of send me money.
As Alastair describes these three scenarios, I know a lot of people might be thinking, how could anyone fall for this? So I wanted to highlight Detective Matt Hogan of the Connecticut State Police and contributor to digital asset legislation in his state, who actually engaged with one of these potential pig butchering scammers. And you can see how anyone could be a potential victim for one of these scams. I mentioned I've been following you on LinkedIn. One of your posts recently, you mentioned that you'd finally gotten one of these texts, the wrong number texts that start the pig butchering engagement. And you said in the post that you were starting to converse with the subject and you were going to use it basically as a evidence gathering tactic. Give us the follow-up because it's been a few months. How far did you get in the conversation?
So it was really interesting because, really I wanted to use it as a learning experience, right? You want to really understand how they communicate with the victims so you can really get the feel for how these people are getting scammed, right? Because you hear it all the time. People will go, how can you fall for such a thing, right? But over the course of several months, you can really understand that, they're texting you throughout the day, and they'll end conversations with, sweetheart and stuff like that. So they're really trying to build that relationship. And after about a little over a month, I started getting frustrated with it. So I just persisted like, hey, you mentioned gold a couple times and investing in gold. How do we go about doing that? Because I'm kind of curious. So that spun the conversation, and she wound up giving me what I wanted, which was the investment sites through the exchanges that they were using. It was called FX6, which is an app on the Apple platform, and they wanted me to go through a couple of DeFi web wallets in order to transact on there. And she was giving me a hat because I was playing dumb. I don't know what Bitcoin is. How does it work? It was really, actually, honestly, a lot of fun. Try not to make fun of it because your victims go through that kind of stuff. But it was just a great learning experience listening to her, the communication and understanding the scam. Yeah, she told me to go to a US-based exchange, open an account, explain that to me. And then once I got there, she wanted me to go to another exchange and basically connect the wallets and then transact my money from my FI to my current exchange and then send to my DeFi wallet, the other exchange. And then on that platform, you could use the web browser to search for the FX6 and then search there. So it actually was interesting because then I did an IC3 search for that particular browser, for the FX6, and I found a ton of other victims that were all victimized by the same FX6 account.
Matt makes a great point about the criminals focusing on getting the victims to open up accounts at legitimate crypto exchanges before requesting they move funds over to a platform that looks legitimate but is actually controlled by the scammers. Let's listen to Alastair, who describes this exact process.
A lot of it revolves around legitimate wallets, like crypto wallets. So that adds another layer of kind of authenticity to it. So Coinbase was one I heard was used a lot. You'd set up a Coinbase account, which would then be linked to a fake website, a fake investment website. One of the victims, Cindy, gave me access to her account, the fake crypto website account. And I logged in, and it looks pretty professional. You can see the wallet with USDT sitting in there, with Ethereum sitting in there. It's essentially just charts showing your winnings. It was like little bits of money being dropped into their account. And the way they get you is it's linked to Coinbase, which is legitimate. So that adds the kind of authentic factor. You can withdraw directly to your Coinbase wallet. They allow you to withdraw back to your Coinbase wallet, back and forth, depositing back and forth. That's a key thing that gains people's trust is they allow you to withdraw for the first few weeks of this, so it feels legitimate. And then you sink more money in because you think, my money's safe. My money is accessible. My money isn't beyond my reach. I can always withdraw it if I feel like something's fishy. And so that's how they lure you in. People generally start small, and then after a few weeks, you start to sink more and more money in. They don't pull the rug straight away. I think the tactic is that I heard from people who've been scammed, then the people who are investigating it, is that they entice you more and more until they think they've tapped you out and there's no more money to come. And that's when they pull the rug and they withdraw all your cash. So they let your cash sit there as long as it needs to sit there until they think they've really tapped you out, and that's when they withdraw. There's no rush. That's a defining factor of this as well, is that there's no rush. If they think they can get more money out of you, they'll let your cash sit there.
Alastair touches on an important topic. There is no rush by the scammers, but also sometimes there's no rush for victims to report the crime due to a number of reasons. Alana Katz, who's the chief of the virtual currency unit in the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office, explains exactly how important reporting time is as part of the investigation process. And then Erin West, who's the deputy district attorney and prosecutor to the REACT task force in Santa Clara County, elaborates on Alastair's point about how long these criminals draw out the process.
Typically for these kind of scams, the reporting time, I've noticed it's at least a month or two after the scam has actually occurred. And the victims have a great deal of trepidation and shame and embarrassment when they come forward. And the first thing I always say to any victim is, I'm sorry this happened to you and it's not your fault. My impression has been like in the course of trying to get help, they have maybe encountered, law enforcement or people from financial institutions whose initial reactions to them have been like, you gave your money away? Like you fell for this? Like,
Yeah.
I can't believe you believe them. That just compounds like the shame and embarrassment that they're already feeling. The people that we know about that are coming forward, if they're reporting that, I can only imagine the people who are so overcome with those emotions that they might not even say anything at all.
I think when we talk about, and because I'll go to the gym and I'll talk about this thing and I get the same skeptics you do, Ian, that are like, oh, that would never happen to me. And I think what people discount is the long con nature of this, that the scammer doesn't show up and then an hour later ask you to invest. This is a person who has won the trust of these victims over a month-long period, who has been there multiple times per day, asking about that person's family, their interests, their pets. That I think that's part of the key tragedy that's happening in these cases, is that our victims are creating a trusted relationship with someone, and they think that they have a special person in their life that they can trust. And when they see their friend having this enviable lifestyle, it doesn't seem completely out of left field that that friend would share knowledge about how you too could achieve that goal little by little. So I think that when people are skeptical, they might not consider the length of time invested.
One thing that makes pig butchering such a complex crime is that some of the scammers are actually themselves human trafficking victims that have been lured with the promise of high-paying jobs, but instead are forced under the threat of violence to scam others. Listen to Alastair tell the story of a victim who was lured to one of these compounds and actually managed to escape.
So Bill Stan was a Malaysian man who was trafficked to Cambodia. So he found a job on an online job portal, a legitimate online job portal in Malaysia, advertising a customer service role in Sihanoukville, Cambodia. He did a couple of online interviews. It was with a Malaysian firm. He trusted that the job was legitimate and it was a well-paying job. And so he flew over to Cambodia for it. And he said that as soon as he arrived, he was met at the airport in Phnom Penh by 4 men, and he instantly had a very sinking feeling that things weren't right. He drove down to Sihanoukville from Phnom Penh, which is about a 4 or 5 hour drive, and they instructed him not to ask questions. They were very shady on details. They were just a lot more hostile than he was expecting. And so he instantly was very wary, started recording, started taking photos, started kind of tracking what was going on. He was taken to a scam compound called the Victory Paradise Resort in Sihanoukville. From there, the bait and switch became evident around the job, and he was told that he wouldn't be doing customer service stuff. He would need to learn how to scam people, essentially. He'd need to learn scripts scripts, he'd need to learn how to use platforms, and he'd be targeting Malaysians and Singaporeans. And his job was to get people to sign up. His job was to identify people on Facebook, Twitter, Tinder, whatever platforms he could use, and lure them into investing in cryptocurrency, lure them into investing into playing like online gambling websites which were fraudulent. And from there he was forced to stay. He had no choice over the matter. His passport was confiscated. He was constantly threatened with violence. He was locked in his room, locked in this resort, told he couldn't leave. And he eventually escaped with the help of someone on the inside who he asked me not to name or reveal, but managed to get back to Phnom Penh. From there, he fled back to Malaysia, and he's been speaking to the press. He's since been told to recant his story by the Malaysian firm he accuses of trafficking him. He's been threatened with lawsuits. I think one was officially filed last week, and he's got a court case coming up. So his nightmare ordeal hasn't really ended, even though he's left Cambodia. He's now facing kind of legal warfare to shut up and keep his mouth shut, essentially.
Sorry, I just wanted to quickly interrupt as Alastair describes these gated compounds. It can be somewhat hard to visualize as you're listening to the podcast, but if you open up the show notes, you'll actually see a link to the recent Chainalysis blog where we have a satellite image of one of these sites that is operated by an organization called KK Park. It shows the sheer magnitude and size of one of these compounds. Alastair continues to discuss how they kept scammers from trying to escape. Unbelievable. When he arrived at the compound, which I understand was originally built as a casino to attract wealthy Chinese, but then when the pandemic broke out, it was sort of repurposed into this scammers compound. When he arrived, was it immediately clear he wasn't allowed to leave? Like, was he given a choice of like, hey, this is actually the job. We know it's not the job that you maybe thought you were applying for, but this is still going to be a good paying gig. Just go along with it. Or was it clear cut he was sort of a hostage at that point?
From my conversations with him, he didn't have a choice over the matter. His passport was confiscated. Victory Paradise Resort is essentially a gated compound too. It's not a casino in which you can, like Vegas, you can walk in off the street. These are gated compounds in which once you're in, you need to be let out. He said there were guards patrolling with guns. It was essentially a hostage situation in which he was told he couldn't leave. If he tried to leave, he'd be threatened with physical violence. And another very intimidating tactic they use is they threaten to sell you to other centres. So indentured labour is a big part of this, in which troublesome workers are sold between centres. So if you're a difficult worker, they'll say, we'll sell you to another centre in which they're a lot stricter. If you make trouble for us here, you'll end up in Myanmar, where the abuses are even more severe. Right. Myanmar is a bit of a black hole. There's a civil war going on there right now. There's a coup. If you think it's bad in Cambodia, where there's some semblance of political stability, if you end up in Myanmar, you're shut off from the world. There's no authorities coming in to save you in Myanmar. So Myanmar, Laos and Cambodia are the three kind of major hubs of this stuff. Laos, it's the main center is within this special economic zone called the Golden Triangle SEZ. That's essentially a slice of Laos which is Chinese run. It's totally beyond the reach of Lao authorities. It's a special economic zone which has been leased on a 99-year lease to a man called Zhao Wei, who's a US sanctioned international criminal. He runs the special economic zone there, and that was a major casino called the King's Romans Casino, which has been implicated in human trafficking and money laundering. And they've since pivoted to scam center operations since the pandemic. And the issue there is just Lao authorities just can't access it. It's essentially a law of its own. It's a little jungle casino which has its own security force. They use their own currency. They have their own prison inside the special economic zone. And so Lao authorities, I think they've managed to enter once or twice, but I would imagine that was at the behest of the Special Economic Zone authorities who said, okay, you can come in. In Cambodia, it's a bit more complicated. This stuff isn't hidden behind a kind of curtain of an SEZ. It's a bit more out in the open. But it's so intertwined with the highest levels of government. The people who own these compounds are often, if not directly, then indirectly linked to the highest levels of government in Cambodia. And it's such a money spinner. And the bribery, I imagine, which almost certainly happens to sustain these centres, is so vast that shutting them down is kind of counterintuitive for the Cambodian government, which is already struggling under pandemic conditions, to go and shut down this industry that's probably generating hundreds of millions of dollars for them, if not billions of dollars to them. And while those kind of figures aren't going to make too big a splash in somewhere like the US. In Cambodia, Laos, countries with GDPs of fractions of the US, Laos is 19 million, Cambodia is only marginally more than that. If you've got an industry that's generating a couple $1 billion, say, a year, and you're getting a nice chunk of that, you're not going to go out of your way to shut it down during a pandemic. So I think shame on Cambodia's international reputation is quite a potent tool to some extent. As much as they can be quite overt and shameless in their criminal activities in this country, they still need foreign investment. They still don't want to be sanctioned. They still don't want to be seen as this enclave of criminal activity. And the last couple of weeks, since a couple of stories about this, major, like international stories about this broke, Cambodia was downgraded to tier 3 on the US State Department's Human Trafficking Index, which is the lowest ranking possible. It downgrades Cambodia from making some effort to combat human trafficking to not making any effort to combat human trafficking. And that's quite an embarrassing thing for the Cambodian government. They came out and rejected it, said it was politically motivated, as they always do. But this is stuff they don't want attached to their name. Sar Keng, the Minister of Interior here, he has since said that all foreigners are going to be audited, essentially, to make sure there's no human trafficking going on in the last couple of weeks. It felt like a slightly weird, veiled threat against, like, not just the kind of the people they should be targeting, these centers, the Chinese criminal diaspora, but also any foreigners looking into it, reporting on it, journalists, that kind of thing too. It felt slightly veiled.
Alastair has painted a vivid picture of how deep these scams are entrenched into governments and economic growth for these countries. Now, Matt highlights that even domestically, many scam cases, when you look closer, have evidence of crypto in them.
The pig butchering scams are always offshore from what we're seeing. When we're looking at the domestic side, it's more so like PII or cards or stuff like that. So it's interesting, we'll have like a case that has nothing to do with crypto, but as you dig deeper, you wind up finding that there is somehow a portion of it that is crypto related. So they're using it as a way to obfuscate their money or something.
One thing that isn't talked about in the media is how victims are being re-victimized by crypto recovery services, which are at worst sometimes operated by the same scammers and at best are operated by opportunistic and many times inexperienced blockchain investigators. Erin really breaks this all down for us.
I think is really important is third-party tracing services. I think that provides an opportunity for our victims to get double victimized. The truth of the matter is that the only people who have the legal authority to recover your money for you are in law enforcement. And these victims are often tricked and manipulated, fraudulently told that these third-party tracing operations can get money back for them. And I've seen some really horrible contracts. I've seen victims give a power of attorney. I've seen all kinds of misleading financial agreements that are brought to victims when they are at their most desperate and they just need help. And oftentimes they're feeling like law enforcement has let them down. I understand how they get there. I just would really caution victims paying anybody to do that kind of work for them.
Erin mentions the fact that many victims feel let down by law enforcement in tracing stolen crypto. And then Alana provides some context about the limited resources many agencies have in fighting these financial crimes.
As a local prosecutor, we really had to assess our resources and our capability as a local New York prosecutor's office. And how much resources and time are we going to put into investigating someone who's in a country that may not even have an extradition treaty in the US? And we've kind of taken the approach to a lot of these cases. Our first immediate step is always, can we get money back from the victim for the victims, asset recovery? That's the first thing we always focus on. And then part and parcel to that, we'll also do some exploratory investigations to try and, suss out what the country of origin is. And there have absolutely been times where the operator behind the scam or the target is in a country that does have a friendly relationship with law enforcement in the US. And I know that they'll work with us. And in those cases, we would perhaps be able to actually pursue an indictment or an arrest or rely on some help from our federal law enforcement partners too. But there have definitely been times where just as a local prosecutor, you realize like I can't take down, like a call center across the world where I have no jurisdictional reach and no satellite office. So in those cases, we really focus on doing what we can for the victims. And we still always encourage them, as Erin said, to report to IC IC3 because that's being reviewed by our federal partners. And, I know there are times when they've put together cases on IC3 and connected the dots and have been able to build larger investigations and work with foreign governments. So every case, it's a case-by-case triage and assessment.
And then Nicola provide the realistic hurdles that law enforcement agencies around the world face day in and day out when fighting pig butchering.
I would say the biggest hurdle is actually the law, let's put it, the legal provisions to some degree, right? And then the risk, if you want. So one way, of course, to share information is bank to bank or crypto to crypto, right? Or law enforcement to bank. But there, one of the biggest hurdles are legal provisions, right? So, for example, law enforcement is actually in most cases not really allowed to share. In some countries, this is now softening up, but that's very, very slow progress and it's risky. And the same is kind of with banks, right? And especially then when it goes global, and cybercrime scams are completely global. So even if they're allowed to share, sometimes it's within the own country, but it's not global. There's all these hurdles, right? And that's actually when we started 3 years ago, and that's more true now than ever. That's one part where the innovation with the two solutions we provide makes sense. Because with us, any bank or crypto exchange can recommend this additional support for their users who are scammed, but it's actually in most cases the victim or the user that comes and reports with us. Mm-hmm. So we get a lot of the data that makes sense to share for the whole ecosystem, but we get it ourselves on our platform, legally checked, so we can then actually provide it. So it's kind of a win-win-win, actually. Yeah. And you don't have to wait for all the laws to change, which they might, which I may never will, I'm a lawyer, so I know this takes a lot of time.
Let's listen to Erin and Alana as they highlight the increased collaboration from the public and private sector crypto community.
I have to say there seems to be an interesting difference in the amount of collaboration that happens between those of us in the crypto space, which I think is super high, and people seem very interested in meeting and collaborating, and some of our other tech partners in Silicon Valley, that I think that there's work that can be done. I think that there's more relationship building that can happen. When I think about pig butchering, I think about what are the on-ramps? How are these scammers getting access to these victims? And I started to keep my own data on it because I was curious. I mean, it's pretty consistently a few major players, and it's LinkedIn, it's Match, it's Meta. And I think that I would love to see cooperation and collaboration with those companies in terms of what can we really do to get these scammers off their platforms? Because if you stop giving them access to victims, at some point, the random text program is going to dry up and people are going to get wind of that, and that's going to stop working. So I would love to see some cooperation and collaboration.
Collaboration with law enforcement is key, but what about the collaboration with law enforcement and the crypto exchanges needed to provide details and freeze accounts? Matt and I walked through what industry collaboration looks like. Do you see that being widely divergent across the crypto ecosystem, where some organizations happy to collaborate with law enforcement and others kind of just never engage?
Yeah, it's prolific. We can really see such a drastic change going from specific exchanges to exchanges. We know which ones, when it goes to a certain exchange, we're like, oh, dead end. And it's very frustrating because we obviously want to do the best we can for our victims here. And if it goes to these certain exchanges that aren't accepting KYC or responding to U.S. law enforcement, it really puts a hamper on our investigations.
It seems like in my time at Chainalysis, so kind of 2.5 years in, there's been a market trend from not only shifting towards KYC, but also eagerness to collaborate with law enforcement. I mean, we've seen a lot of exchanges kind of hiring up investigative teams who are big global actions, not just on scam activity, but on counter-terrorist financing and some of these other CSAM, where it seems like there's collaboration, at least for me as an outsider. I'm curious if you feel that from a law enforcement perspective.
We do. I think we're recognized, or at least these companies recognize, hey, if I want to be regulated appropriately by the US or the UK or wherever, they need to have proper measures in place and have those opportunities to have KYC and AML and BSA regulations properly in place. So we're definitely seeing it on the back end.
The React Task Force gets mentioned in many of the episodes we covered in this podcast. Erin describes what it is and the prioritized mandate for information sharing across the United States and with international law enforcement. Erin, you mentioned in your intro the React task force. I think that deserves a little more focus because I think you've helped to create something pretty special there. Could you describe what React is and the concept behind that?
Yeah, it is something pretty special, and I'm really honored to be a part of it. The legislature in the late 90s in California recognized that high-tech crime was becoming something that needed more attention and needed more funding. So it established 5 task forces in the state of California, and it gave them some additional funding. React is Santa Clara County's task force. We have 5 other counties, but we're in a unique position because we have agents who come there and stay there for a bit and really develop the skills. And not only do they use it to solve their crimes, they're instrumental in teaching nationally the techniques that they've learned and used. And so I think it's a really great framework that I would love to see used across the country because of the partnership, not only between the agencies within our county, but we also work with federal agencies. And that gives us an even bigger footprint when we need to make an arrest in Oklahoma. We can count on our Secret Service partners. So it's a great model. It's a great framework, and it's enabled us to do some really important cases. The thing that I'm sure Alona has seen too with cryptocurrency is you need a lot of partners. That this is not something that one investigator can do by themselves. You need private partners, you need public partners, you need local law enforcement, you need federal law enforcement. And the idea of putting together task forces, smaller task forces nationwide, I think is a great way to tackle this. And it started off as let's get local law enforcement to talk to each other. And we have a listserv, and I think that's been really helpful in trading information. And instead of everybody trying to learn this stuff independently in their own office, while they also handle a whole stack of other cases, this enables us to share information and collaborate. I think it's been really helpful.
I just want to give a shout out to Erin's coalition because it's one of just like the best examples I've ever seen of collaboration between local law enforcement. We're usually so siloed from each other and don't know what people are doing in other states. But I think everyone in that coalition really recognized, as Erin said, that like we have to learn together and help each other. And just, as an anecdotal example, like our crypto investigations rarely stay within the borders of New York State. So on multiple occasions, I've been able to identify victims in other states. And it was because of the coalition that I was able to connect with people like in Tennessee or Hawaii and Canada and get a sharing order to pass that information on. And they were able to get those victims help with social services or work on, retrieving money from them. And before that coalition, I don't know, I would have just started cold calling, random law enforcement offices. So I really, really appreciate the community in that coalition.
It's great to see the collaboration efforts working so strongly in the United States and also including international partners. Nicola adds the importance of involving other key stakeholders like banks and messaging or dating platforms, and how he's hoping platforms like Cybera's, which include many of the key stakeholders, will improve investigation efforts.
When the money flows, it's often the banks today that are in the crossfire, but I think rightly so. The banks, especially in the UK, are fighting back quite a lot, saying, hey, this has to be a whole ecosystem approach. We have to stop the scams or, put some more pressure, if you like, with the online platforms where they often originate. And it's true, right? Even also in our platform, we see a lot is originating on WhatsApp, on Telegram, also on online dating platforms. And so I mentioned, right, when you go and report to the police, for example, that's one thing that certainly is not happening, or in most cases not, right? But actually, and that's when you report to Cybera, that's the vision, but we're actually very close to it, is when you report, we don't just share information with the banks or with the crypto ecosystem to prevent, but we're also, providing that to a dating app provider. And we're moving towards that. And I think that's the effectiveness we want to achieve also with our platform, that when you report, the quality is checked, it's high, this is a scam case, and then at this high quality, this is distributed and available to everybody, to all the companies that are involved, and they can immediately shut this down or investigate it. That trend is happening and very important. I fully agree with you.
Chainalysis really believes in more awareness that can be spread to protect consumers, and Alana, Matt, and Erin explain why this is more important now than ever before.
I think the time to reporting it and getting it into the right hands in law enforcement is probably the most important determining factor to whether or not we can get funds back, which is why I think we really have to incorporate education and outreach in the communities that are being hit by this the most, because even if they've never heard of the scam, when we go out, and do some type of outreach presentation by the DA's office, if it happens to them, hopefully they'll remember, Alona didn't seem like she would be mean to me. I can reach out to her office or I can report this.
I really thank God for Erin West. She's been such a bull in this area. She's gotten the message out, and she is really trying her best to educate the masses. And that's really the key to all this, I think. And if we can just educate across the board, because the problem we talk about is time, right? Delay in time. So if we can get those smaller PDs educated on this and get the message out, and then they can educate their communities on it, that's really what the key is to all this, is getting that message to the civilians.
Well, I'm a big talker, and I'm a big concept person of whenever you have an opportunity to talk to someone, whenever there's a lull in the conversation, throw out, have you heard of pig butchering? Have you heard about this? The point is you've got to normalize this stuff, and you've got to normalize, you don't need to go to a Bitcoin ATM. If anyone ever wants to send you to a Bitcoin ATM, if anyone ever asks you to send gift cards, there's just a million scams, and these people spend all day, all night figuring out new ways to trick us, and we've got to keep talking and stay on top of what's going on.
Erin mentions Bitcoin ATMs as being a huge facilitator for some of these pig butchering scams. Matt was actually a key contributor to digital asset legislation in Connecticut, which is aimed to curb the use of Bitcoin ATMs in scams and to elevate reporting requirements. Let's listen in on why he felt this to be so important he wanted it engraved into law.
We started to recognize, obviously, there's been an issue with the kiosk ATM machines involving crypto scams with the elderly and older population, specifically in Connecticut, obviously. So we tried to address it in some manner. So I actually reached out to some of our partners with the AARP, our Coalition of Elder Justice in Connecticut, and we started just kind of discussing what we could do to really fix that problem as best we could, because it's more of a regulation side, right? So it's a civil issue, not so much criminal, that the regulations that we are going to be working on. And what we attempted to do was we wanted to get the ATMs under a money transmitter license, so that in Connecticut they have to be following the same regulations as a regular ATM machine would. That was part of the issue, was getting the definition changed, which we were able to do and get them as a money transmitter. And some of the other things that we wanted to do were work on the transaction limits. We wanted to work on, obviously the biggest problem with a lot of those is the fees, right? That you're talking, a victim gets between 5 and 20% of a fee. So if they're sending Bitcoin to their scammer, they're getting charged, say, $35,000 for a $20,000 Bitcoin. So there's a huge markup. If we do recover assets for them, they're already going to be at a loss because of the fees that they're getting charged. So those are some of the big issues we were trying to accomplish.
Wow, it's so great to combine some of these important conversations about pig butchering and the challenges and possible solutions to combat it. Before we finish this episode, I think it's only fitting that we hear a final thought from Erin West, who has been mentioned frequently on various episodes and overall is well known in the industry. Erin shares some key insights and important concepts she wants to leave listeners with.
Thank you for having me back to just talk a few more minutes about what's been going on in the world of pig butchering since I was last here. I feel like it's been a long time since Alona and I talked to Public Key, so I'm glad to have a couple of opportunities to talk because it's not getting any better. In fact, the numbers from IC3 just dropped, and there is a significant increase in both investment scams and romance scams. And it's hard to tell where pig butchering fits in all of that because when people are reporting to IC3, they could easily check either box. So in my mind, that puts us at over $5 billion in reported losses just last year that could be attributable to pig butchering scams. And we know, like we always have, that those numbers are going to be low because victims are reluctant to report. So I would put those numbers even 10 times higher. I'd put those numbers at 50 billion last year being handed over household by household into the hands of bad actors across the world. I started off my campaign really being anti-pig butchering. I really pointed the finger at pig butchering as what it is that needs to stop. But the more I look into this, the more I realize that it's way more than pig butchering. What we're seeing is transnational organized crime that is being perpetuated on an industrial level. We are seeing these criminals who have had over 5 years to entrench themselves in Southeast Asia, building massive compounds, infrastructure, organized ways of doing business, We know they've brought in consultants to get better at each part of this, and they've had 5 years to do it. So our fight is more important than ever. We need to be louder. We need to let people in Congress know. We need to let more victims know. We need to be aggressive about educating and aggressive about asking for help. What I am seeing positive movement in is the movement toward private-public partnerships. We talk about that a lot, but what I'm seeing is an actual interest from industry, from law enforcement, from NGOs to work together to combat this. And I'm proud to tell you that Operation Shamrock is leading the way to bringing that together. So I'm delighted to say that in the month of March, we can look forward to an invitation-only webinar to some of the key stakeholders in transnational organized crime. And we'll go from there with accountability, and we'll have an in-person meetup later this summer. We're moving forward, but we've got a long way to go. So thank you for letting me have this opportunity to give you a couple more thoughts about where we're going. And as always, let's continue to educate, seize, and disrupt.
Hey there. Thanks for listening to this week's special episode. If you enjoyed what you heard, do me a favor. Open up your podcast app, rate the show. Give us a review, tell us what you liked. Even better, you can share the podcast with your friends. And of course, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Last May, we analyzed the role of cryptocurrency in fentanyl sales by looking at on-chain activity of addresses associated with chemical precursor shops. We recently updated our coverage to account for several thousand more similar addresses being added to our database. Total inflows to this expanded set are approximately $250 million, with activity dating back to July of 2015. Read the update on our blog for more information about regional exposure to these new addresses and see charts, graphs, and maps with updated data. Also, our Crypto Crime Report webinar series dates have just been released. We'll be breaking down national security threats, compliance issues, market integrity, and consumer protection in crypto, along with all sorts of other crime types, starting March 14th. To read the full story and get access to the webinar and blog, just head down to the show notes where you'll find links to all that content.